And he was actually excited just by pivoting his thought process, his anticipation of conflict, instead to an opportunity for curiosity.
You're listening to Unfinished Minds,
A podcast about learning, teaching, and staying curious in a messy, ever-changing world.
We're Amy and Ben, partners in life and in business. We've spent the last 20 years exploring what it means to learn on purpose, whether in classrooms, in companies, or in parenting.
Each week, we pick a big question and have an honest conversation about how people grow, what it means to teach well, and why learning still matters, especially when the world feels uncertain.
Whether you're a parent, a teacher, a leader, or just a curious soul, we're glad you're here. If you'll indulge me, I think I'd like to start with a quote today.
I will.
The mind is not a vessel to be filled, but a fire to be kindled. And that's Plutarch. And I would like to kindle our discussion of curiosity.
Love it. And no cats will be harmed in the recording of this podcast.
Thank goodness. I want to ask this time around, why is curiosity so vitally important, especially in learning? And it's definitely one of our shared values. We're doing a podcast episode about it, so it's important to us. Mm-hmm. I think it's something that's been vital to us in our personal lives, our academic lives,
in our work lives,
in our professional lives, for sure. So I want to sort of zoom out and take a look at why it's important, generally speaking, why learning, in our point of view anyway, kind of hinges on it.
Well, I'm curious. How do we start?
Well, I want to know, is learning without curiosity?
Oh boy.
Is it really so vitally important? I keep having this idea that if you're not actually curious about something, are you actually learning? Or are you just going through the motions? Are you just learning by rote?
Wow. So this is really interesting. I think it's safe to say the more curious you are about a subject, the more easily you will learn. The more curious you are, the better you'll learn. It's about motivation and everything else. But I don't know that that's what you're asking. You're kind of saying, in the absence of curiosity entirely, is it possible to learn at all? I mean, what might be an example of that? A really reticent student in a class they hate?
Mm-hmm. Just sort of copying things down, committing them to memory, coughing them back up again. And we've talked about this in a previous episode about memory. If you're not actually a little bit intrigued by what you're learning, is that learning? And if yes, it's still learning, is it good learning? Is it effective learning?
Well, I think they're two different questions. I mean, it will be less effective. I think that's non-controversial, as I said before. But I think you can learn if you're completely reticent, if you don't care at all, if you're not at all curious.
Are there skills that you can learn without being curious?
I want to believe that you can learn even if you're not curious. Mm-hmm. I kind of imagine we couldn't get by in this world if we didn't have that ability.
If we had to wait for some wonderful lightning bolt to come out of the sky and inspire us and engage us every time we needed to learn something.
There are plenty of kids who, insert class name here, math, science, English, whatever, maybe they're just not interested. Mm-hmm. There's plenty of kids who get by, who get through school, and who do learn. I'm curious, why did you ask that question? What about that is important to you?
That's a good question in and of itself, too. I feel in my gut that the really good learning happens when there's curiosity behind it. And I think if we're going to keep people engaged in learning, there has to be that sort of spark behind it. Mm-hmm. Learning something because you have to can be very different than learning something because you're actually curious about it. But I think if we're going for a long-term drive to learn, there needs to be a carrot. There needs to be a motivation. So maybe the question isn't, can you learn without being curious? But rather, are you going to want to? Are you going to want to commit to it? Are we going to get at the good stuff if there isn't curiosity behind it?
You said something there that I want to unpack, which was, I think, implying that curiosity is the motivation to learn. I don't think that's true. I don't think it's the only motivation.
Certainly not the only, but it's a long-lasting one. It's a profound one. It's a good one.
Well, I mean, we're talking pretty frontal lobe kind of stuff right now, but if we get reptilian in here, right? I don't think it's curiosity necessarily that drives us to stay away from the hot. Well, it might be. It was curiosity that made us touch the hot in the first place.
Yeah, I'm curious about how much of our reptilian brain, where is that where the curiosity lives? And I don't have a background in neurology, so I can't speak to that.
Oh, this is profoundly unsatisfying because now I'm really curious about all that, and I don't have any answers, and we're not going to share them here. So
I just want to learn.
Dear listeners, if you're curious about that, like I am, go look it up, like I'm going to after this conversation.
And then let us know.
But we're going to stay within the realm of our particular expertise and experience.
Okay.
And let's say it's safe to say you can learn if you're not curious. But let's just focus on how we lean in on curiosity.
Okay.
Because as you said, we both separately and together and in our family and in our work consider curiosity to be a core value.
Okay. Well, I think I've got some examples of how it makes things better, even if it isn't a prerequisite, even if it isn't a sufficient or a necessary condition for learning, how it can make it so much nicer, how it can make it so much more engaging. So
I'm chuckling because I'm acknowledging how a formal logic statement just came out of your mouth, which I think is something that you learned somewhat against your will in university.
Oh no, I was totally formal logic, maybe not, but informal logic, I was totally curious about that.
Well,
and the more I learned, the more I wanted to know. It was awesome.
But I just want to appreciate the necessity and sufficiency of that came up there.
Well, what about curiosity as a bonding experience in learning?
Yeah.
I see curiosity as, I know you and I both seek out other people, and we seek it out in ourselves and in our family and
in our
coworkers and partners and people we volunteer with. I have radar for that, and I see it as a way to get close to other people, to relate to them, to get to know who they are. I think you can tell a lot about someone by asking, what makes you curious? What are you sniffing around for? It's a bonding experience because when you are curious with someone else who's curious, you want to get to know about them. You are curious about other people. And I find it kind of a turnoff when someone is an incurious person. So what about that? What about curiosity in learning being a bonding experience?
Well, it's contagious, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Curiosity. And because everyone brings a slightly different worldview, bent, experience to something, when multiple people get together and share in a curiosity about something, I feel like it can only add to everyone's, of course, knowledge, and which is a shortcut into great learning. Mm-hmm. But even if we're not talking about a formal learning kind of situation, getting people feeding off of each other and learning from each other can really only happen if that curiosity takes place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you're curious about others, aren't you going to be curious about yourself too? Aren't you going to see in them, oh, that's interesting how this person thinks and what they're into and what they're after, and am I like that too? Mm-hmm. And self-knowledge is, one could argue, just as important as knowledge of others too.
Yeah, in all kinds of dimensions. Since we're on the topic of learning, or we're dancing around like a bonfire, this beautiful topic of learning, understanding yourself and understanding what you need to learn, like what your environment needs to be, if it's learning or if it's being productive or whatever, like that self-understanding is really critical.
I'm also thinking too, we're navigating a very difficult world at the moment. And I see it as seeking out other curious people and holding each other's hands as we try and be curious about what's out there and what's happening and how difficult it is at times. Maybe that's a little bit of trauma bonding, but having that curiosity together, like we're going to hold each other's hands and we're going to look into the yucky stuff and try and figure it out. And it's going to be okay because I know there are other learners with me doing it. I'm not staring into the abyss by myself.
Yeah, there are other learners, and I think this is also a way to identify other knowledgeable people with skills that you might be lacking or with experience that you might be lacking, where together you can approach, maybe even solve problems that might not have existed in that way before.
Yeah. There really is strength in numbers, and that reflects in curiosity too.
I'm wondering, can someone be too curious? What do you think of that?
There's the whole thing with the cat, right?
Okay. Cats, let's focus on humans.
Yeah.
For now at least.
There are a few different ways to unpack that. I think there are people who are so curious. It may be overwhelming, and it may kind of keep you from taking action. And I think
Like analysis paralysis.
almost,
kind
yeah,
of?
not quite this. I don't think curiosity and analytical
They're not
thinking. They're
100%
not.
the
Yeah,
same.
they're not. But there's some overlap. There's a Venn diagram there. But I think if you spend all of your time wondering and don't cut yourself off at some point and think, well, I have to go do something about all this, that's a danger. That's a drawback.
There is seldom a perfect and complete answer. And I know this is similar, or maybe even just an extension of what you just said, but you can ask questions for too long. Your threshold beyond which you believe you understand something can be too high. And it makes me think of people that I've worked with who can function really well in the absence of detail, or in the presence of ambiguity, and others who stalwartly demand complete detail before they can move forward. And both are incredibly valuable. And having a nice balance of those people on your team on a project are amazing. And I think that weaves in, at least in my mind, with curiosity. So you can be curious, but you also, I believe, have to be accepting of a certain amount of ambiguity in order to be productive. And if your curiosity doesn't let you move forward unless you have all of the answers, and your instinct is to come up with question after question after question after question, you will not be able to deliver on a project where it's not exactly the same as something you've done before.
Yeah.
And so for innovation, for invention, for creativity, I think curiosity is necessary, but too much curiosity will indeed be the end of productivity.
Writers get told that a lot of the time. People in the creative arts get told that a lot of the time. You will never be finished. You're just going to run out of time. There are real world constraints on this. I think philosophers get accused of that a lot of the time. Like, why don't you stop thinking about that and just go do something? Like, go make lunch.
Well, I think we may be drawing a false parallel. I'm going to be clear about that, between ambiguity and clarity and curiosity. They're not at odds or exactly the same, but I think they're related.
I want to sort of make a statement about being too curious in the sense of asking about stuff, certain stuff that's taboo or off the table. I don't think you can be too curious in that sense, that, that you're not supposed to ask that question, or you're not supposed to talk about that subject. I don't think there are very many things that should be off the table. I think the fact that something is difficult or confusing or, uncomfortable, I don't think that's a measure of being too curious. The types of things you talk about, you can't be too curious in that sense.
So you're kind of touching on decorum and social
Yeah,
norms.
yeah. And I don't like limiting people's curiosity on the basis of what's acceptable or unacceptable to think about, to be curious about.
Oh, that's really interesting. So there's this social construct, there's standard acceptable behavior as a way to override curiosity.
Yeah.
To everyone's detriment.
Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, that sort of thing. And I don't stand with that. You can't be too curious about the types of things you're curious about.
I mean, that reminds me of some conversations I know you've had with some parents or grandparents around your work. Do you want to talk about that?
Oh, when I do philosophy with children and I speak to grandparents, teachers, parents, caregivers, most of them are pretty open. Most of them are leave the door open for curiosity on a whole bunch of different subjects. But occasionally you get someone who says, we just don't talk about that with our kids. I don't want to open that can of worms. I'm just not going to. And it always makes me wonder, when they walk away at the end of the conversation, I'm kind of like, but your kid's probably curious about that already. And play that tape forward. How's that going to end? When someday you find that your kid's been wondering about that for years and you just didn't allow it to come up. You sort of not stifled it, but pushed it aside, discouraged that line of discussion. What does that tell a kid? To be told, no, you're not supposed to think about that. And we could go back to the whole, curiosity as a bonding experience in learning.
Yeah.
I think it's a bonding experience in parenting.
So I'm just putting myself in the place of that kid who is curious about something and knows, has been told in no uncertain terms, that's off limits. So how do you stifle that? How do you turn that off like a light switch? I can imagine what that feels like. I mean, maybe some of us can remember that from our own childhoods. There always were things that were taboo and not to be discussed. And, we carry that with us.
Again, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a neuroscientist. So I don't know how that rewires you. I don't know how that blocks signals or, prevents neurons from firing or anything like that. But I've seen it in families. I've seen it in the kids that I've taught philosophy to. They want to know. It's already there. It's very difficult to stifle it. I think you prevent conversations, but I don't think you prevent the curiosity. And I think it can have historically, various demographics of people have been told, no, you don't talk about that. No, you don't think about that. That's not for you. And it's kept entire groups of people, entire segments of the population from going into specific career paths from advocating for themselves. So it's dangerous, both on an individual level and a more widespread systemic level, to tell anyone, no, you don't get to think about that. You don't get to wonder in that direction.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, that brings up thoughts of, what does it mean to provide a safe space for an employee to be creative, to be innovative?
But to also get things done too, because you've got to keep the lights on, and it's a difficult balance, isn't it?
There is a needle to be threaded
Yeah.
there, but I think most people have experienced a workplace where curiosity was not fostered, was not valued. And I suspect a lot of people, well, certainly people who'd be listening to this podcast, I suspect a lot of people would get right out of Dodge if you're not allowed to, if you're actively discouraged from having that kind of curiosity.
Let's take a step forward. Is there a way that curiosity can be used, can be embraced to kind of future-proof ourselves?
Okay, you're talking about AI.
Yeah. But are there other ways that we can use curiosity, not just to distinguish ourselves from technology, but to actually help us navigate? Is there a way that curiosity can be a life raft?
Well, speaking for myself, I think a lot about hobbies and passions. And I've been having a really great time with a relatively new hobby, repairing vintage stereo equipment. And I have learned so much. And I actually judge a project or a piece that I'm working on, not just by did it work, did it not work, but did I have fun learning a whole bunch of new things. While I think a lot of my curiosity was pointed towards my work, my profession, our business. It's at this stage of my life that I'm actually getting way more interested in hobbies than I was in the past. And I know for myself, like, that is future proofing. While uncertainty might prevail in certain aspects of the world or even in our business, having that itch get scratched from things that are closer to home and more personal and maybe more fun, that's been a real game changer for me. And that's not even talking about the interpersonal stuff, which we can also talk about. But let me bounce the question back to you. What about yourself?
Well, I've been asked before when I was an educator, and very recently I've had parents asking, what do I do? My kid wants to study this. My kid's interested in that, but I don't think it's very practical. I don't think there's going to be that space for them in the world, according to what they're actually curious about. And what I usually tell parents, and what I tell myself over and over again, is stock the cupboard with skills and interests. And if you don't know what's coming and you're not sure what's going to work, make sure you've got as many tools in that toolbox as you possibly can. And I think curiosity it's wonderful all to itself, but it's also a way of developing all these other skills, interests, mindsets. It's a way of building those muscles in your brain and in your heart too. That we're going to need different interpersonal skills as we move to the future. Things are going to change, and we're going to need to be curious about other people in different ways than we were before. We're going to need to know how to work at different things than we used to. We're going to need to know how to make ourselves happy, how to find joy, how to build things, how to keep busy in different ways. So I'm all for using curiosity all by itself because it's cool, but also as a way to sort of, as I said, stock the cupboard. Build yourself a little pantry of stuff that's going to keep you happy, healthy, productive, connected. And I think that's the ultimate act of future-proofing.
Yeah, I don't want it to sound like technology is the end of the world. The reality is that it's been true forever that technology can help us be incredibly successful and do great things if we're open to effectively leveraging it. The way I use AI, it changes daily. We're in this moment of AI changing daily, what it can do changing daily. And I actually find that fascinating. And a big part of my day is quite joyful, figuring out how to get this thing to help me do something that would otherwise have been time consuming or difficult. For me, a big part of it is getting rid of blank page syndrome, helping me start by prompting with, you've done this before, or here's a way to do that, and things that are not accurate or necessarily, and not necessarily what I'm going to end up delivering, but a great way to start, a great prompter for me. And it helps remove some barriers that allow me to then move forward. And, I'm often very curious about what these tools do. And in that way, I think it's very much in line with the values that we're talking about.
Absolutely. I find as a storyteller, as a writer, I don't know where I would be if I hadn't opened up myself to being curious about what new tools are available for me. A long time ago, it's been 15 years of diving into, well, okay, what can I do besides be on the printed page? How far can I take this? And it's true. It's kind of joyful to be able to find out, hey, I can do this, but I can also do that. And there's something out there that will allow me to expand even further, to reach even more people. That's beautiful. And I wouldn't have gotten there if I hadn't opened myself up to that. If I put my back against the wall, I think I would have got stuck.
Right. And with regard to people, speaking for myself, I feel like it's a skill I've developed in the last few years to not just hear someone talking about what's going on in their life as a problem for me to help solve, but instead to be far more curious about the situation, about what that person actually needs. And of course, I'm talking about us, I'm talking about our relationship within our family, I'm talking about employees, I'm talking about friends. And realizing how quick I was, even not long ago, and not long ago can include yesterday, for heaven's sake, but how quick I am to jump to a solution to help a problem go away, rather than be really curious about what this individual needs from me. And I feel like I have become, by really developing the skills around asking these kinds of questions and actively listening, which really does just boil down to actually being curious about what someone is thinking, feeling, and saying. That's been very transformational for me.
Even on a bad day, people are really interesting, aren't they? Even when the stuff hits the fan, human beings are pretty interesting. And if you're curious and you open yourself up to that, it is transformational.
Yeah. I was talking to a friend literally this morning who is considering how we happen to be entering into a holiday season, how he's going to interact with his family where there's a lot of opinions, political leaning and so on. They're very different than his own.
It's on the menu just as much as turkey is this time of year.
Right.
Yeah.
And he was really excited about his plan to just ask question after question.
Just be curious.
Just be curious. Just help me understand why you feel that way. Help me understand that better. And he was actually excited just by pivoting his thought process, his anticipation of conflict, instead to an opportunity for curiosity.
I think that's really interesting because it is always available to us as an option, isn't it? Happiness is not always an option. Productivity is not always an option. There's so many things that we can't always count on, but the curiosity is always there. It's a nice friend that walks beside us everywhere we go, where there's always available to us. And I find that to be very comforting.
I think that's beautiful. Thanks for learning with us.
If today's conversation sparked something for you, share it with someone you care about, or someone you're still figuring things out with.
You can find us online or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
And don't forget,
we are all unfinished minds. Let's keep learning.